Well, in our last episode, we talked about mainly the character traits of the characters here. And we said in the last episode that Elizabeth has a very strong sense of family. She's pretty close with Jane, right? Like, remember when Jane was sick, how she didn't leave her side and she attended to her and made sure that she was well. And of course, now that her sister's heart has been broken here, although Jane is trying to handle it very well, Elizabeth is upset about all of this. She vents, her frustration to Jane, and she starts kind of letting that cynical side over that we talked about in the last episode, letting that kind of come to the fore a little bit. She says she tells her sister, Elizabeth tells Jane, she says, there are few people whom I really love, and still fewer of whom I think well. The more I see of the world, the more I am dissatisfied with it, and every day confirms my belief of the inconsistency of all human characters and of the little dependence that can be placed on the appearance of either merit or sense. And so she's starting to really get cynical and bitter about the way the world is, about the way people are. And Jane, always, the optimist, I guess you would say, Jane, or she always tries to keep, a stiff upper lip, and Jane tries to see the bright side. Jane encourages Lizzie not to give herself over to these negative feelings and to grow cynical, because as we've seen, her father has a tendency to do that. And I think that's one thing that Elizabeth is trying not to be. She's trying not to have a marriage where she ends up a cynical and bitter person like her father, wouldn't you say?
I think that's right. And I think she's also, she's being tested as a character, because our experiences can make us better or they can make us worse. And she's kind of going through a phase where maybe some of the experiences she's having are tempting her or possibly leading her to become a worse person, to become harsh and cynical. But she's having these other experiences, for example, finding out the truth about Mr. Darcy and finding out how wrong she's been. And that's helping to correct what might go wrong. And so I think that's one thing you see, that we're not automatically just going to become better people over time. But if you're moving in the right direction, then your experiences, God does use that to move you in the right direction, that there will be temptations, but there will be something to correct that, and there'll be the grace to overcome that. And you'll come out at the end knowing something that you didn't know before. And I do think you see that with Elizabeth, that she's having to face that temptation to be cynical, to feel that maybe she's better than other people because she sees the truth. But that's not the truth of who people are. It's trying to see the worst of who people are isn't the truth. Because a partial truth isn't the truth. And that's where you get into the most error, is when you seize on something that's half true.
Right. And Elizabeth starts kind of turning her, her negative attention toward Charlotte too, because she loses a bit of respect for Charlotte for marrying Mr. Colin strictly, not out of love, but strictly because she wants to be taken care of. She wants to have a marriage and to be provided for. And Charlotte was a good friend of hers, and she's now even kind of turning her, I hate to use the word venom because Elizabeth's not to that point, but she's really starting to kind of turn her aggravation toward Charlotte a little bit. And I think that, Evie, everybody, characters in a book like this, real people in the real world, anytime life throws us aggravation and hardship, and people aren't like you think they were or think they should be, like if you've got somebody, a friend of yours who you really enjoy being around, and this friend makes a decision that you don't agree with, and that friend's stock kind of drops in your eyes, I think we all have a tendency to want to feel better about ourselves by kind of tearing other people down. And that's a real cheap way to feel better about yourself. You never really feel better about yourself by tearing other people down, And I think Elizabeth is she's been kind of hit with some of this hardship of life here. And she's getting to be just a little, I don't want to say jaded, she's not there yet, but that temptation is always there for all of us. And I think she's kind of, her feet are kind of being held to the fire here, because, and she might be talking about people in a way to make herself feel better, to feel, at least I'm not like them. I would never do something like that. And Evie, isn't it true that, we've got to figure out what our goals are in life and our relational goals. And is my goal to feel better about myself, or is my goal to get along with the people around me? And I can, you know, tear people to shreds. I could, every little knickknack thing that's wrong with somebody, I could point that out, and that might make me feel a little bit better in a sinful sort of way, but that's not healthy. That's not going to build healthy relationships there. You've got to, rather than tearing other people down, I think our goal should be to build successful and fruitful relationships. And I think people who are overly cynical and overly bitter and always look to criticize, I don't think they really do a very good job of building healthy relationships. And I think Elizabeth is kind of, she could go in either direction here, and she could really take that bitter road, or, maybe she could listen to her sister and, when Jane says, you shouldn't think that way, we shouldn't think that way. And I think that Elizabeth could go either way here. What do you think?
I think that's right. And just sort of in a general way, a lot of times we think that the flaws that we see in other people are the truth of who they are. And that if we were to try to think the best of them and overlook that we're somehow suppressing the truth. But the reality is we all have so much more dignity and value because we're made in God's image and we're children of God. We all have so much more value than we can even conceive of. And everybody else has that value. And when we're focusing on the flaws and we're not seeing the value that these people have, we're not seeing the truth at all. So I think what's called for is not to overlook the flaws or pretend that they're not there. I guess in a way you do want to overlook it and to say, I'm not going to think about what's bad about you, I'm going to think about what's good. But you're not denying what is true by saying, well, this person is something that they're not. But we're choosing to look at the value that people have. We're choosing to look at what is good and what has infinite value as opposed to what irritates us in the moment.
I think we really shortchange ourselves and we shortchange other people if we only focus on the negative qualities of other people, right?
But it's so easy to do.
Oh, it's very easy to do. I mean, I'm, just like anybody else, and I'm a preacher. I have to make that concerted effort. I will not let my mind start dwelling on the negative, and you don't build anything productive. You don't build anything fruitful if you only focus on the negative. And that's not saying be overly optimistic, be naively optimistic, and you don't consider the negative at all. You do, but you don't, you want to take in the person as a whole, and
Yes.
remember, see their good and see their bad, because I have to remember, no matter how right I think I may be in any circumstance, I make mistakes too. And I would say that I make mistakes that don't really accurately reflect the nature of my character. I mean, wouldn't
Right.
you say that? I do that from time to time. I think I'm a wise man. When I say wise, I don't mean like I'm smarter than anybody else, but I try to think rationally and I try to make wise moral judgments. I try to have a good sense of discernment to judge right from wrong and choose the right and wise path to go. However, I make foolish decisions too. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't want somebody to think that I'm a fool and label me a fool just because I make a dumb decision every now and then. I wouldn't want somebody to do that to me. And so we have to make sure that we don't do that to other people.
Yeah, because there's this gap between who we're aspiring to be and what eventually God is going to make us into and what we currently are. And I think, I think part of what you see when you love somebody is you see those flashes of what they were meant to be and what they're going to be. And then there's all the reality of who we still are,
Right.
And I think a lot of times it's so easy to give ourselves credit for our aspirations. Like, I am these things that I'm aspiring to be. And in a way, that's true because we already have that identity in Christ. But at the same time, we can, again, sort of give ourselves credit for being as good as we want to be eventually. And we don't see that in other people. And that's what you have to see about other people, that we're flawed and they're flawed. But, Christians are aspiring to be something more than what they are, that there's something that we're meant to be that's greater than what we currently are in our sinful state and in this fallen world. And that's what we have to look for. And I think that there is always that temptation to be like Elizabeth or Mr. Bennet, who's fallen all the way down that way, that he doesn't see the value in other people if they're not as smart as he is, or they say things that embarrass him or they irritate him. He doesn't see the value of who they really are, and we lose touch with that because we're in a fallen world. We have really no idea of the value that we have.
Right. And I think that attitude that Elizabeth said there are few people whom I really love and still fewer of whom I think well. I think that can be kind of a dangerous attitude. I understand she's saying that in the spur of the moment. She's angry. She loves her sister, and she doesn't like the situation that's been put upon her sister here. So she said that out of anger. But that's a real dangerous attitude, because that can really put us on that pathway to becoming Mr. Bennet. And that's not who she wants to be. Because when you start isolating yourself from people, when you take that attitude, and you start keeping other people at arm's distance, and you can't have a successful family and keep those people at an arm's distance. You have to take the good with the bad, you know what I mean? And you work to promote the good in yourself and in others, and you work to, filter out the bad, those bad tendencies, those bad habits. This is what I do. I'm maybe a little too critical on myself sometimes, because I focus on what I do wrong, because I like you talked about knowing yourself, and we'll get to this a little bit later on in the episode. I want to know myself, what I am capable of that is good and what I'm capable of that is bad, because if I'm aware of what my bad habits are, then I can more accurately fight against those. I want to try to prevent them, but they're always going to sneak out. And I think that that's just a healthy way to be, is to say there is bad here, but we can't throw out the good and just focus on the bad. And that's what I tend to do with myself sometimes, is just focus on the bad. And we also, when it's with ourselves or others, we also have to focus on the good too. And I think Jane, and that's why it's good to have good influences around you, because Elizabeth is kind of sliding down the slide of bitterness here, and Jane, she says, let's take it in the best light, a light in which it may be understood. She still wants to kind of, keep a good attitude, and I think Jane is a good influence on Elizabeth.
I think that's true, but the flip side of that is Jane is slow to see that she shouldn't trust people that she really shouldn't trust.
Right.
And trying to see the best in people does not mean that we need to trust people when we've been given evidence that these people lie to us or they're not trustworthy for whatever reason. And I think that's the balance that's hard to strike, but we do have to try to strike that, and to realize that some people, we shouldn't trust them, their character isn't good. At the same time, they're still valuable people made in the image of God, but at the same time, you don't put your trust in those people. Someone that is a liar, they tell you something, you can't believe it. I think that's, Elizabeth sometimes tries to go too far, though. She tries to see through people's motives to try to catch everybody out, and so she ends up not trusting anybody. And that's the balance you have to strike. And what's kind of interesting is we talked about a similar issue in The Road, and I think this is just because this is a major issue in life. It's trying to strike that balance between seeing what's good in people, seeing the best in people, and at the same time, seeing the truth about people that we really can't trust.